I can't think of any better way to spend a yesterday morning than going out to the city for a nice big breakfast, but because I don't have a mouth, that's not possible. I'm gonna have to do something else, and I'm feeling like playing some Sly Cooper. Sly Cooper is a series I adore. It combines so many things that I love. I like games, and I have a soft spot for platformers. I like raccoons because they're the only animals to be clean enough to wash their food, but also dirty enough to be willing to rummage through people's bins. Also, I like thieves. Of all the crimes, theft is the most glamorous and gentlemanly. I don't like all kinds of theft. Identity theft and wage theft are pretty brutal, but the Robin Hood style theft that this series is all about, I really like. If I wasn't such a successful used condom salesman, I'd definitely pursue it as a career. The first Sly game was a simple and enjoyable linear 3D platformer, while the second Sly game took a completely different approach, swapping out linear levels in exchange for missions taking place in open worlds, all contributing to one big heist at the end of each episode. Sly 1 was great, but Sly 2 was a masterpiece. It had everything. Great gameplay, fantastic presentation, an actually really cool story. That was ruined right at the end, but up until then it was cool. Even some of its more questionable choices were pulled off really well. Sly 2 is one of the best games I've played, and that's not a claim I throw around willy-nilly. This is putting a lot of pressure on Sly 3 on or Among Thieves to blow me away even more. Sly 3 is probably the Sly game I remember the least about, but I remember not liking it as much as Sly 2 when I played it the first and only time. How good is Sly 3 on or Among Thieves? Let's see how it holds up in my second time through. The story begins as any good story does, with the main protagonist being crushed to death by a hideous drooling mutant. The setup is that Sly and friends are trying to gain access to the Cooper family vault, but the island has been occupied and aggressively defended by Dr. M, some kind of super intelligent baboon, who's also trying to get in. He's been trying for years, but still has yet to succeed. The opening sequence is actually playable, and in it, you learn that Sly, Bentley and Murray have recruited a bunch of new members to try and pull off this job. When things start to go wrong and Sly is on the brink of demise, he starts to recall the events that led him here, which probably isn't the smartest thing to do in that situation. I'd personally try and escape, rather than spend 9.5 hours reflecting on all the gameplay that had to happen for Sly to get here. But to each their own. I do like this way of telling the story though. It sets up the antagonist and the story premise decently well, and plants a seed of anticipation since you know what it's all building up to. It's clever and a good idea for a story. Sly's flashbacks take us back to the game's first episode, an opera of fear in Venice, Italy. An opera of fear shows that Sly 3 carries on the same formula as Sly 2. You're plonked into an open area with a certain goal in mind. In Sly 2 that was collecting the clockwork parts, but in Sly 3 it's recruiting new members into the Cooper gang. In the case of this first episode, Sly and Bentley are trying to re-recruit Murray onto the team, but he refuses because he needs to complete his spiritual training and make the black water run pure. Coincidentally, an opera singer called Octavio has been polluting the waters of Venice with tar, so Sly and Bentley assume that that must be what Murray was carrying on about. To make the black water run pure, Sly and Bentley need to pull off a variety of missions to put an end to Octavio's operation, involving mainly stealth and platforming, with the occasional vehicle mission as well. Murray even joins in occasionally, making use of his Aboriginal bull form that he learned in the Australian outback. Now, as a white Australian, I'm naturally ignorant to Indigenous culture. Not on purpose or anything, it just tends to work out like that. But even I'm pretty sure that the Aboriginal bull form is total bollocks. Anyway, An Opera of Fear was a great introductory episode for Sly 3 and got me pumped for more. It might not have been as bombastic, fun and memorable as Sly 2's The Black Chateau, and Octavio is nowhere near as iconic as Dimitri, but it got the job done, and that's ultimately what you hire people for. I was keen to get stuck into the rest of the game. It's just too bad that the further into Sly 3 you go, the more out of control it gets. I want to preface this by saying that overall, I enjoyed playing Sly 3. I did, I had fun. But I really must ask, what the fuck were they thinking? Sly 3 is one of the most distracted, unfocused games I've ever played. I don't mean to imply that Sly 3 is bad, because it's not. It's perfectly fine. But I'm struggling to understand what they were trying to do. Sly 3 has so much random ass stuff in it, it's ridiculous. And nothing will get that point across better than simply listing all of the crap that's in this game. Let's start with the 8 playable characters, shall we? Sly 3 sees the return of the original Cooper Gang members, Sly, Bentley and Murray. Sly and Murray are largely the same as they were in Sly 2, which is a good thing because they were great there. There are some new abilities that each of them has, like Sly's costumes and Murray's stupid ball form, but for the most part they're identical. The only one to have changed significantly is Bentley, who at the end of Sly 2 was crushed by Clockler. He's now wheelchair bound and this completely changes how he plays. sort of. He still has his bombs and sleep darts, but now he has extra aerial mobility with the help of his rocket boosters and hovering. It's actually pretty amazing. He somehow feels less disabled in the wheelchair. Is that offensive? Both Bentley and Murray now have the ability to pickpocket as well. The three main members are largely the same with some minor improvements, and honestly, they should have stopped there. That's all the game needed. But it seems the developers weren't happy with just that, so there's a lot more to come. Occasionally, you will get to play as Carmelita. When the gang's plan involves manipulating Carmelita in some way, it usually results in the player taking control of her, which is pretty sick. I generally don't approve of manipulating women, but I think it's acceptable here. If they had to add a playable character, Carmelita makes the most sense since she's a pretty major character. Her gameplay though, it really isn't anything special. She can perform a basic kick attack and a pretty high jump, but most of her gameplay revolves around shooting the fuck out of things with her shock pistol. That's kind of her natural reaction to everything anyway, so it makes sense, but from a gameplay perspective, it doesn't offer a whole lot. The novelty was cool when it happened in Venice, every other time it just got less and less exciting. I think it would have been cool for Carmelita to have her own story mode and show her perspective on things. That's an idea I can get behind, but just chucking her in during random missions and having her shoot up the place, while pretty typical police behaviour, doesn't make for interesting gameplay. You recruit the next two playable characters, the Guru and Penelope, in Rumble Down Under and Flight of Fancy respectively, and they're kind of similar. Not in terms of appearance or personality or anything, but they do have one thing in common, and that's that their gameplay revolves around controlling things. The Guru has the power to hijack enemies and creatures and control their minds. But while theoretically a very useful power with loads of applications, it's only ever used to ram enemies into objects that conveniently can't be broken by anything else. On rare occasions you might get to do something cool with it, but it's usually no different than riding a kamikaze horse. Penelope, instead of controlling living beings, controls her RC vehicles, either her helicopter which comes with a hook, or her car which comes with a turret. Whenever Penelope is relevant, it's usually her controlling one of these two very basic vehicles in some way. There's nothing wrong with them, they're just not very exciting or interesting to use. They're pretty lame, especially coming from a character who is supposed to be an expert in mechanical engineering. She should have all kinds of revolutionary vehicles, not a pair of kids' toys. The final two new recruits are Sly's former adversaries, the Panda King and Dimitri. As they join very late into the game, you get to play as them maybe twice each. But honestly, you wouldn't be missing much if they weren't in the game at all. Panda King's gameplay is all about loading up his fireworks cannon to obliterate enemies and objects, which is fun and exciting at first, but gets boring pretty quickly since it all happens automatically. You don't even have to aim really. And because Panda King isn't actually capable of anything else, he ends up being pretty irrelevant. The same applies for Dimitri, who fills the role of Team Diver. His gameplay involves swimming around and shooting things with his harpoon. Dimitri's gameplay is similar to Panda King's in that it's boring, but it's different in that Dimitri's gameplay was boring immediately. There's just nothing special about it, aside from the fact that you use the face buttons to move. Whose idea was that? I know Dimitri has his own style and lives to the beat of his own drum, but I wouldn't call using the face buttons to move greasy sweet. These two are great as characters, and it's cool to be able to play as Sly's former enemies, but as far as gameplay is concerned, I couldn't give less of a shit. Based on that, Sly 3 already sounds like it has way too much going on. And you're right, 8 playable characters is way too many for a game like this. But guess what? That's only the beginning, because Sly 3 is also full of all kinds of vehicles, gimmicks and alternate gameplay styles that clog up most of the experience. I should make clear that none of them are outright terrible. At the very least, they control somewhat well. But that doesn't excuse the sheer quantity, frequency and intrusiveness of them. You've got things like costumes, passwords, dialogue, memory games, boats, big trucks, cranes, planes, boats, tower defense, hacking, the grapple cam, turrets, boats. There is so much crap in this game. I'm not exaggerating when I say pretty much every second mission in this game is some kind of minigame. Honestly, Sly 3 is the best Mario Party game I've ever played. By Dead Men Tell No Tales, Sly 3 has completely lost its mind. It literally turns into Sid Meier's Pirates, a completely different game. Navigating the seas, pirate battles, treasure maps, it's hardly recognizable as a Sly Cooper game. It's cool, but it's not Sly Cooper at all. And this is my biggest criticism of this game. It doesn't feel like I'm playing a Sly Cooper game. Sure, the structure is the same as Sly 2, but when you look at the gameplay experience, there isn't enough Sly Cooper gameplay in it. Sly 3 completely loses its focus on the main three characters and their abilities, and instead prefers to flood the game with vehicles, gimmicks, and irrelevant playable characters, all of which are worse than playing as Sly, Bentley, and Murray. It honestly feels like there is more Sly gameplay in a single level of Sly 1 than the entirety of Sly 3. That's obviously not true, but that's how it feels. When Sly 3 sticks to the main gameplay, it's really good. But it's not happening enough, and it makes it harder to enjoy when you don't get to do the stuff that makes Sly games great. Sly is all about stealth and platforming. Sly 3 is all about using these vehicles and alternate gameplay styles to cause carnage and wreak havoc. It's just not what it should be. There are other reasons why I think Sly 2 outshines this game. I found that in Sly 3 it was harder to appreciate each episode. The removal of clue bottles is one reason for that. The clue bottles gave you a reason to explore each episode's setting and get acquainted with its layout, quirks, and features. In Sly 3, there are no clue bottles, and therefore no reason to look around and get familiar with your surroundings. You're just straight into the missions, which results in a lot less of a connection with the location. They're all presented very well and the music for them is great, but I feel like they also suffer because of how the story works. In Sly 2, you are hunting down the Clockwork parts in possession of the Claw Gang. This meant infiltrating their bases of operations, seeing what they were up to, watching the members interact with each other, and seeing how all the pieces came together. Because of that, each location had a very unique, individual feel to them. Places like the Contessa's prison in Prague and Arpeggio's airship were fucking awesome because of that. In Sly 3, the locations are still great, but they feel less individual. The reason we visit these places is to recruit new team members. All the antagonists have nothing to do with each other, they're just there, conveniently causing problems for the next prospective Cooper Gang member. Some of them are actually really cool villains. The Mask of Dark Earth maybe not so much, but I felt genuine disdain for General Tsao and Captain Lafouille. But they're not relevant to anything at all. They just exist in the vicinity of the characters we're trying to recruit. This causes a disconnect between each of the episodes. The story doesn't have a satisfying progression, it doesn't feel like a complete picture, and the locations don't feel as purpose-made. There are no nightclubs or spice production plants, no estates turned into war zones, nothing like that. It's just, oh, we're in the Netherlands now, we're in China, we're in a pirate village. It just doesn't feel as special. I did like visiting Australia since that's where I'm from, and while I don't appreciate that they portrayed Australia as a bunch of drunken miners willing to destroy sacred Aboriginal land for the sake of the mining industry, it is accurate. This also makes Dr. M a pretty weak antagonist. While he's better than fucking Clockler, he still doesn't have much of an impact. Sure, he's the reason we're going to the effort of recruiting new members, but he's not relevant for most of the game. He only appears in the beginning and the end. He has no presence throughout, which is a shame because he has potential. He's a mad scientist with an army of genetically mutated creatures that serve him. That kind of character would make for a great overarching villain, if he had more than 10 minutes of screen time. And the ending, what a letdown! We go through all of that effort to build up a team of specialists to get into this vault, only for Sly to abandon the riches and fake amnesia so he could go and fox Carmelita. It really felt like a flat payoff for all that anticipation. Not only was the story progression unsatisfying, so was the ending. Now, I don't want this cascade of negativity to be misinterpreted. Overall, I did like and enjoy Sly 3. I think it's a pretty good game. In a world full of games that are less fun to play with than actual shit, Sly 3 stands tall as one of the good ones. But I would be lying if I said it was better than 1 and 2. When it's just the normal Sly, Bentley and Murray gameplay, Sly 3 is just as good as, maybe even better than Sly 2. That's the good stuff. And an Opera of Fear shows that if Sly 3 had kept the right balance between standard gameplay and everything else, it could have been amazing. But they tipped the scales in the wrong direction, and instead of focusing on Sly Cooper gameplay, they prioritized this shit. I'll make it clear, Sly 3 has good gameplay, good levels, great presentation, a decent story, a great sense of humor, it has a lot going for it. But it's plagued by some very questionable gameplay decisions that resulted in the game being a hodgepodge of distractions and mistakes. What is it with platformer trilogies where as soon as they reach the third game they go, fuck, we've run out of ideas, let's just fill it with rubbish. Sly 3 was a good game, but it doesn't come close to reaching the fabulous heights of Sly 2. Sly 2 simply does everything better. It even has more content, 8 episodes to Sly 3's 6. I don't hate this game, I like it, but I don't love it. Personally, I think Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves is the weakest Sly game at this point in the series, and Sly 2 remains the king. But there is a 4th game, Thieves in Time. Will it be better than Sly 3? Time will tell. Literally, because I'm building a time machine to find out. Now, anyone want to buy a used condom?